I was dead asleep, tucked under my warm blankets, dreaming about literally nothing important, probably tacos or how I'd finally clean out my garage, when suddenly my world erupted in sound. Not a polite knock-knock like a normal neighbor, oh no. This was a full-blown screaming alarm clock, except the alarm clock is a person and it's 4:50 in the morning. Your lease is up, you have to vacate right now. I shot upright, heart pounding, mouth dry, blanket tangled around my legs like some sad cape. My first thought, who in their right mind yells at strangers before sunrise? My second thought after seeing the blinding porch light through the blinds, oh, it's Karen. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. The woman who could spot a crooked mailbox from 3 blocks away but somehow believes she can rewrite property law in her pajamas. And yes, she was in her pajamas. Not cute pajamas either, more like a questionable leopard print set that screamed, I own this neighborhood even while I sleep. She was clutching a coffee cup like a scepter, waving papers around and glaring like I had personally offended her in a past life. I blinked a few times, convinced I was hallucinating. Maybe I'd finally crossed some invisible HOA boundary in my sleep. Maybe sleepwalking through the yard I'd accidentally painted a bush the wrong color. But no, there she was. Reality check, Karen, screaming, very awake, very angry. I stumbled to the door in my slippers, half dreaming, half preparing to either negotiate with a banshee or get tackled into early eviction. Karen, it's 4:50 a.m. Can we maybe talk about this later? I said, my voice shaking like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. Her response was nothing short of cinematic. She threw her hands in the air, paper sheets flying like confetti in a dystopian parade. Later, your lease ended 3 years ago and you're still here. This is unacceptable. I froze. 3 years, 3 years. I've owned this house for 3 years, 3 years. And somehow in her warped little HOA universe, I was a tenant about to be evicted for the crime of owning property. Now normally I'd run, hide, or call 911 immediately, but something in her fury was oddly mesmerizing. Maybe it was the way she stomped her foot like a tiny drill sergeant, or maybe it was the sheer audacity of this woman thinking she could dictate reality at dawn. My cat, who had been sleeping on my desk, jumped up, looked at Karen, and gave what I can only describe as a judgmental hiss. Even Mr. Whiskers knew this was ridiculous. Karen started filming. Of course she did, because if she couldn't scare me into submission, she could at least make sure the HOA Facebook group knew exactly how terrible I was. I'm documenting this, you will not ignore HOA authority, she shouted, peering into her phone like a courtroom judge with a gavel. I did the only sane thing a human being could do in that situation. I slowly backed away from the door. Do you maybe want to sit down and discuss this? I asked, voice shaking, half hoping she'd say yes and we could sip coffee and laugh about it. But nope. She shook her head violently, muttering something about bylaws and illegal occupancy as if those words themselves had some magical eviction power. Minutes stretched into a nightmare. I tried to breathe, tried to convince myself this was temporary, tried to come up with a plan that didn't involve hand-to-hand combat before sunrise. I glanced at the clock. 4:52, 2 minutes had passed. 2 minutes in which Karen had escalated from yelling to packing my porch like she owned it, waving the phone, pointing at the sky, probably plotting to summon reinforcements. I realized then that this wasn't going to be simple. This wasn't going to be a polite HOA correction, a quick call, or a friendly neighborly chat. Number Karen had declared war at dawn and my house was ground zero. I had to figure out how to survive the next hour, preferably without spilling coffee on myself or accidentally setting off my own neighborly feud. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, she started banging on my front door, louder, faster, like a percussionist possessed by some HOA deity. My heart leaped. Somewhere deep in the shadows, I heard my cat hissing again, probably questioning every life choice that led to this moment. I knew one thing for sure, this was only the beginning. I backed away from the door, heart hammering like it wanted to escape my chest. Karen wasn't about to let me breathe. She waved those papers like a flag of war. You don't understand, your lease is up, you're illegally occupying this property, she screamed, each word sharper than a mailbox knife hybrid. I had to act fast, I needed proof. Something tangible, undeniable. Something that said, I own this house, you can't just make stuff up at 4:50 a.m. and expect me to move out. I ran to my desk, throwing open drawers with all the finesse of a frantic raccoon. Tax documents, mortgage statements, insurance papers, they spilled across the floor like confetti at a celebration I hadn't been invited to. My cat, still glaring at Karen, leapt onto the desk, knocking a stack of papers into a neat pile at my feet. Thanks, buddy, I muttered, scooping them up. Every document I could possibly show her to prove ownership was now crumpled in my hands. Karen was relentless. She paced the porch like a tiny drill sergeant on caffeine. You can't hide behind papers, I have authority, she shouted. Authority over what exactly? Over common sense and decency, apparently. I looked at her phone, still recording, great. Now I'm going viral in my pajamas before breakfast. I tried reason. Karen, I have owned this home for 3 years. I pay property taxes, insurance, the works. You can't. 3 years, she interrupted, gasping dramatically, clutching her pearls, or whatever questionable jewelry she had on, and pointing at the pile of papers like she was directing traffic in a war zone. You're still occupying this property without permission. You are violating the rules. Her logic was confusing, but I didn't have time to dissect it. I had to act. I grabbed the first paper, waving it like a flag of truth. See, mortgage statement, property deed, tax receipt, all in my name. I own this house. You cannot evict me. She squinted at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. Then, oh no, she picked up the phone, zoomed in, probably planning a cinematic slow-motion post. Unbelievable, tenant refuses to leave even though lease expired. My internal monologue was screaming, if this goes online, I'm going to be the laughing stock of the neighborhood, and it's 5 a.m. Karen wasn't done. She started packing faster, flailing more, muttering about HOA bylaws that I swear she had just made up. You're endangering the community by ignoring rules, she yelled. Ignoring rules? My cat just hissed at her again. Even Mr. Whiskers knew this was nonsense. I tried a different tactic, humor. Karen, if there were a prize for most dramatic morning wake-up call, you win, congratulations. She didn't laugh, she couldn't. Humor wasn't in her vocabulary. Instead, she stomped toward the street, shouting into her phone, probably calling reinforcements. I realized with dread, she might actually call the police. And sure enough, the thought barely crossed my mind before my fingers were dialing 911. Yes, hi, I need help, I said, voice trembling but steady. There's a woman outside yelling that I need to leave my house and I own it. The dispatcher was patient, too patient. Can you confirm your address? They asked. I rattled it off, trying not to sound like I was about to pass out. Meanwhile, Karen, sensing my inaction, got louder. Neighbors peeked out their windows. Some whispered. Some stared, probably judging my life choices or enjoying the entertainment. Time slowed, every second was agony. Karen's voice was now competing with birds starting their morning chorus, creating a bizarre soundtrack of horror comedy. This is not real life, I thought. This is a sitcom pitched by an angry HOA member at 4:50 a.m. Then she hit her final move. She slammed her fist on the door frame and shouted, I will call the police if you don't vacate immediately. I froze. Oh great, here we go. I glanced at my papers again. Mortgage statements, deeds, tax bills, everything was in my name. My pulse raced. I had to stay calm. I had to survive. I had to outlast the 4:50 a.m. Karen apocalypse. And in that moment I realized, the next hour was going to define my morning. Maybe my life. Karen had declared war, the HOA had chosen its champion, and I was just trying to keep my pajamas clean while not getting evicted before sunrise. By the time I hung up with the dispatcher, my brain was in overdrive. Karen was still outside, yelling at what I can only describe as a combination of air molecules and my front door. Her hands were flailing like she was conducting an orchestra of doom, and the sun hadn't even decided to wake up yet. I paced the living room, trying to figure out my next move. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, had retreated under the bed, glaring at me as if saying, You signed up for this, human, don't fail me now. I grabbed my paperwork again, property deed, mortgage statements, tax receipts, and stacked them carefully in my hands. These are my weapons of truth, I thought, and they better be strong enough to survive a Karen attack. The minutes crawled by, each knock, each shout from her felt like a countdown to disaster. You're breaking the rules, you have no right to be here, she screeched. I swear, if she had a megaphone, the entire neighborhood would have known my private business by now. Then it happened, a siren in the distance. My heart leapt. The cavalry is coming. I peeked out the window. 2 police cruisers rolled slowly down the street, lights flashing, engines humming like mechanical angels of hope. Karen's eyes lit up triumphant. She raised her arms as if she had personally summoned them through sheer force of HOA will. I stepped outside cautiously, holding my paperwork like a shield. Good morning, officers, I said, voice trembling but trying to sound calm. I own this house. She says my lease is up. Karen jumped in immediately, pointing at me like I'd committed the most heinous crime in the history of suburbia. This tenant refuses to leave. He is illegally occupying the property. She yelled, breathless, eyes wide, face red enough to cook bacon on. The officers looked confused. One raised an eyebrow, the other scratched his head. Ma'am, can you explain what's happening? One asked. Karen didn't just explain, she performed. She gesticulated, waved papers, and narrated the situation like it was a live-action soap opera. He's breaking the rules, he's a danger to the community, he refuses to acknowledge HOA authority. I held up my papers again, showing them calmly, one by one. I own this house. Look at the mortgage statement, the property deed, the tax receipts, everything is in my name. Karen gasped like I'd just insulted her entire family tree. 3 years he's been living here without permission, she shrieked. Yes, Karen, 3 years of ownership. Reality clearly wasn't her strong suit. The officers exchanged glances. One of them muttered something that sounded like, well, that's a new one. They asked me a few questions, scribbling notes while Karen continued her performance outside like a caffeinated Shakespearean villain. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering, pointing, probably placing bets on how this would end. One neighbor leaned out, muttering, does she do this every week? I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, probably both. Karen wasn't done. She stomped closer to the officers. Do you understand? He is breaking the rules. You have to make him leave. Her hands waved wildly, almost knocking over a small shrub. The officers, politely but firmly, explained that HOA rules do not give her the authority to evict a homeowner, and certainly not at 4:50 a.m. Her jaw dropped, literally. For a split second, I thought she might cry. Then, in true Karen fashion, she huffed, waved her phone again, and muttered something about documenting everything for the HOA board. And just when I thought the tension had peaked, she went for her ultimate move, yelling louder, pointing at me like a commander ordering my immediate arrest. 3 years he's been living here without permission. You will pay for this. This is unacceptable. One officer calmly stepped forward, blocking her path. Ma'am, that's enough. You're not helping. Let's resolve this calmly. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to write a thank you note to every officer in the country. I wanted to never, ever wake up before sunrise again. But Karen wasn't done. She was packing again, muttering under her breath, glancing at neighbors for validation, filming everything on her phone like a reality TV show director on caffeine. And I realized something terrifying. Even with the police here, this was far from over. Karen's energy was endless, and her sense of entitlement was infinite. I gripped my papers tighter. I took a deep breath. This was only the first act of the 4:50 a.m. Karen showdown, and I had to survive the rest without losing my mind or my house. By the time I stepped onto the driveway, the sun had barely yawned over the horizon, painting everything in a soft, golden glow, perfect lighting for an apocalypse, apparently because that's exactly how Karen was acting. She was packing in front of my house like it had personally offended her, waving papers so violently I thought one might hit orbit. The police had parked behind her, lights still flashing faintly, giving the scene a surreal, almost cinematic vibe. It looked like a standoff in a Western movie, except the villain wore leopard print pajamas and clutched a smartphone like a medieval weapon. Karen turned on me instantly. You think you can just live here without consequences? She shouted, pointing at me like she had personally measured every square inch of my property. This is a violation. You're in contempt of HOA rules. I tried to stay calm, even though my pulse was racing. Karen, I said, raising my hands in what I hoped was a non-threatening way, I own this house. These are my property documents, my mortgage papers, and my tax receipts. They're all in my name. I'm not breaking any rules. She blinked, and then, like a dam bursting, the words spilled out. 3 years, 3 years you've been living here without permission. I froze. 3 years again? Apparently in Karen's world, property ownership is determined by how much she personally approves of it. I wanted to explain, but before I could, she waved her phone in my face like a victory flag. I'm documenting this. I'm posting this online. Everyone will know how reckless you are. The neighbors had begun to gather. Some peeked through their blinds, some whispered on porches, and one brave soul even stepped onto their lawn for a closer look. I caught the eye of a woman across the street who gave me a sympathetic nod. Okay, at least someone sees reason. One of the officers stepped forward, raising a hand calmly. Ma'am, we need you to step back. This is escalating unnecessarily. Karen gasped. Escalating? He's violating the HOA, she shouted, spinning on her heels to address the crowd she had apparently summoned. Do you understand what's at stake here? Chaos, lawlessness. I cannot let this continue. At this point, I realized humor might be my only weapon. Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady while simultaneously trying not to laugh, you do realize I pay taxes on this house, right? Your HOA can't just decide my lease ended in the middle of the night. Her face contorted like I'd just insulted her personally. She pointed at the police again, as if they could magically override the laws of property ownership with their badges. Officers, he's trying to gaslight me. I bit my lip, resisting the urge to burst out laughing. Gaslighted by my own homeowner? Sure, why not? The officers finally stepped in more firmly, guiding Karen a few feet back from the driveway. She stomped, muttered, and glared like someone had just eaten the last slice of cake in her house without permission. Meanwhile, I held my papers tighter, knowing this standoff wasn't about to end with reason. Then, just when I thought the tension couldn't get any higher, she made her next move. She started issuing fines. "You will pay for this, $1,000 for violating HOA rules, $2,000 for ignoring my authority," she shrieked. I stared at her. Are we in a simulation? The officer beside me sighed audibly. "Ma'am, HOA fines cannot be enforced this way, especially not on a homeowner. You need to step back and let this matter go through proper channels." Karen, clearly undeterred, muttered something under her breath, probably about loopholes and bylaws she had just invented. She raised her phone again and started recording the confrontation for posterity, or maybe her next HOA board meeting. I took a deep breath. The papers in my hands felt heavier than ever, like they were carrying not just proof of ownership but the weight of surviving Karen's early morning apocalypse. Every knock, every shout, every dramatic gesture was a test of my patience, and I was determined to survive. Because I knew one thing for certain: if Karen thought she could scare me off my own property, she was in for the longest morning of her life. And this was just the driveway standoff. The war was far from over. I thought after the driveway standoff that maybe, just maybe, I could finally breathe. Silly me. Karen, apparently unwilling to let reality get in the way of her crusade, had decided it was time to take this battle online. By the time I got back inside, my phone was buzzing like it had developed its own panic disorder. HOA Facebook group notifications were exploding. I picked it up cautiously, half expecting a bombshell, half expecting kittens playing piano videos. No kittens, just Karen, and a post that could only be described as a masterpiece of over-the-top drama. Her post read, roughly, "Unbelievable, a tenant refuses to vacate after lease expiration, dangerous behavior, community at risk. See the evidence in my video below." Below the post was a video, oh joy, a shaky 4:50 a.m. recording of her screaming at me, waving papers, and packing like she was auditioning for a horror movie. I stared at it, mouth agape, while Mr. Whiskers, who had now returned to the living room, gave me the most judgmental look a cat can give. "Really? This is your life?" The comment section exploded. Some neighbors cheered Karen on, typing furiously, "How dare he ignore the rules? We need justice. This is unacceptable behavior for any community member." And then the classic someone who clearly had just woken up, "What time is it there? 5 a.m. I sighed, yes, 5 a.m., welcome to suburbia's early morning horror show. I knew I couldn't just sit there and watch my reputation get shredded, so I decided to strike back, calmly, rationally, and yes, with a little bit of sass, because let's be honest, this situation was absurd enough to deserve it. I posted, "Hello neighbors, just to clarify, I own this house. I've paid taxes, mortgage, and insurance for 3 years. HOA rules do not give any member authority to declare a homeowner illegally occupying their own property at dawn. Attached, documents proving ownership." Then I uploaded photos of my property deed, mortgage statements, and the latest tax receipt. Each one was carefully labeled, "Evidence meets social media." Almost immediately, the tide began to shift. Some neighbors, previously cheering Karen on, started questioning her. Comments like, "Wait, if he owns the house, what is she talking about? And isn't this a little over the top?" began appearing. Karen predictably didn't take this lying down, she doubled down. Another post, longer this time, titled, "Community Under Threat, Homeowner Ignores Authority." She included a dramatic recap, emojis everywhere, and a gif of someone shaking their fists at the sky. I swear it was like watching a soap opera and a circus collide. I tried to stay calm, but the absurdity was overwhelming. My coffee had gone cold while my blood pressure skyrocketed. I glanced at Mr. Whiskers, who had resumed judging me, tail flicking with unmistakable disdain. But here, where it got tense again, a few of Karen's loyal followers started messaging me privately, asking if I really was a tenant, if I had permission to live in my own house. The suspense was real. Could this escalate beyond my digital proof? Could she somehow turn this into a neighborhood witch hunt before breakfast? I realized then that the digital battlefield was just as dangerous as the driveway standoff. Karen's energy was boundless, and social media could amplify her fury faster than any human voice. Every notification felt like a ticking time bomb, every comment a potential escalation. So I did what anyone in my situation would do. I stayed calm, responded politely but firmly, and let facts do the talking. And secretly, I enjoyed watching some of Karen's supporters start to waver. Doubt was creeping in. Even her army wasn't immune to reality, I thought, smirking. By the time I set my phone down, a small crowd of neighbors had peeked out of their windows again, murmuring among themselves. Word was clearly spreading. The suspense was still thick, the tension unresolved. Karen wasn't finished, and I knew the next confrontation, probably at the HOA board meeting, would be even bigger. But for now, I had survived the first wave of social media chaos, armed with nothing but truth, documents, and a dash of stubbornness. I sank into my chair, coffee in hand, and braced myself for what was coming next. Because if Karen thought a little Facebook post could scare me, she had no idea. And that, my friends, was just the beginning of the digital war. After surviving the 4:50 a.m. driveway nightmare and Karen's digital meltdown, I thought I could finally take a breath. If only suburban life came with a pause button. By mid-morning, my inbox was overflowing. HOA Facebook messages, neighbor questions, and a few "Are you okay?" notes from people who had witnessed the chaos. But the real fun or terror was Karen. She had doubled down, posting more updates, each one more dramatic than the last. There were exclamation points, emojis, and even a few gifs of someone fainting dramatically. I swear she was auditioning for a daytime soap opera and a circus simultaneously. I knew I couldn't just sit back. Facts were on my side, but Karen thrived on theatrics, so I decided it was time for a strategic countermove. Calmly, methodically, I responded in the Facebook thread. "Dear neighbors," I wrote, trying to keep my tone polite while hiding the growing smirk on my face. "I appreciate your concern regarding my home. For clarification, I own this house and I have all the documentation to prove it. The HOA does not have authority to declare a homeowner's lease expired, especially when the homeowner is the actual owner." I uploaded pictures of my property deed, mortgage statements, and tax receipts clearly labeled like a mini courtroom exhibit. Evidence meets social media, I thought. I pressed post and held my breath. The responses were immediate. A few neighbors who had previously supported Karen began questioning her narrative. Comments like, "Wait, she can't actually do that, right? And so he owns the house? I think Karen's losing it," started appearing. Karen, predictably, was not pleased. She posted again, typing furiously, caps lock firmly engaged. "This is unacceptable. The community is in danger. He must be held accountable." She even included a short video of herself packing in the driveway, shaking papers, and muttering something about bylaws that no one, including her, understood. Meanwhile, I started noticing subtle shifts in the neighborhood. A few neighbors who had been siding with Karen were now hesitating in their comments. Doubt had entered the room. Karen's aura of invincibility was cracking. I decided to press my advantage. Calmly, I posted another update. "For anyone wondering, here are the HOA bylaws. As you can see, no member has the authority to evict a homeowner. If there are questions about this, I suggest reading the official documents rather than relying on dramatized social media videos." This was the turning point. Slowly, comment threads started to swing in my favor. A few neighbors even tagged others, encouraging them to read the bylaws themselves. Karen's army, once so loud and confident, was now fragmenting. I could almost hear the collective hesitation. Maybe she's overreacting. But Karen, of course, was far from finished. She began whispering about loopholes and technicalities in her next post, as if she could invent new laws on the spot. I glanced at her video once more. She was now gesturing wildly at the sky like the HOA heavens were personally conspiring against her. At this point, I realized something crucial. Karen thrived on chaos. She thrived on attention. Social media had amplified her drama, but it also created an audience that could see the truth. I had to continue calmly, methodically, and confidently, letting the facts speak louder than her theatrics. By mid-afternoon, the thread had transformed. Karen's posts were now being met with polite but firm skepticism. Even some of her closest supporters were commenting, "Are you sure about this? And maybe we should wait for the board meeting before deciding anything." I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. My paperwork was still spread across the desk, coffee long gone cold, and Mr. Whiskers had curled up beside me again, purring as if to say, "Finally, some sense is being restored." But I knew this wasn't over. Karen's dramatic energy was boundless, and the next stage, the HOA board meeting, would be the ultimate showdown. The suspense was building. I could almost hear the ominous theme music of a soap opera playing in my head. For now, though, I had scored a minor victory. I had calmed the neighborhood narrative, exposed Karen's theatrics, and proven that facts were on my side. It was a small but important step, and I knew that when the HOA meeting came, I would be ready. Because if Karen thought she could intimidate a homeowner into submission, she was about to learn that some battles are won with patience, preparation, and a little bit of public exposure. And trust me, when that meeting happens, it's going to be epic. The morning of the HOA meeting, I felt like I was walking into a battlefield dressed in, well, a slightly wrinkled button-down and my "don't mess with me" face. Karen had sent out a notice that all members of the board and neighbors were to attend, promising revelations about illegal occupancy. I could almost smell the popcorn. This was going to be something. As I entered the community hall, the tension was palpable. Karen was already there, perched at the front like a hawk on a fence post, papers in hand, ready to strike. Her phone was poised to record every second. Around her, a small army of loyal neighbors whispered eagerly, some clutching coffee, others shaking their heads in anticipation. I set my documents on the table calmly, trying not to show my nerves. My mortgage statements, deeds, and tax receipts were neatly stacked, ready to counter whatever theatrics Karen had planned. She glared at me, nostrils flaring, as if she could burn the documents with sheer force of will. The meeting began. The HOA president started reading the agenda, clearly trying to maintain order. But Karen had other ideas. She jumped up mid-sentence, waving her papers and shouting, "This man is illegally occupying his home. I have documentation. The community is at risk." I raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Karen, we'll get to that." Calm, measured, factual. The board members were already flipping through my proof, and I could see subtle nods of comprehension. Some of the neighbors who had been cheering her on were now squinting at her like she had just suggested installing a pool in a desert. Karen was relentless. She pointed at me dramatically. "He has no right to live here. I demand immediate action." I took a deep breath. "Karen," I said, voice calm but firm, "I own this property. These are my mortgage statements, my deed, and my tax receipts. I have been paying for this home for 3 years. There is no violation here." I slid the papers across the table, neatly organized like evidence in a courtroom. The board members leaned in, examining everything carefully. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Karen's face, once fierce and confident, began to show cracks. Her eyes darted back and forth between me and the board, searching for support. There was none. Trying to regain control, she began muttering about loopholes and technicalities, waving her hands frantically. One of her allies whispered to her, clearly confused by the avalanche of facts she was facing. It was almost cinematic, the villain realizing the hero might actually win. Then the twist, one board member spoke up. "Karen, can you explain why you haven't adhered to several HOA rules yourself? Missing forms, unapproved decorations, and unauthorized community modifications." Karen froze, the room went silent, her phone lowered slowly. Well, she stammered, and the dramatic facade started to crumble. I couldn't help it. I tried to hide my smirk. Karma, it seemed, had arrived in person. The board continued calmly, pointing out inconsistencies in her claims and reiterating that homeowners have protections that cannot be bypassed by dramatic displays or social media rants. Karen tried to argue, but every point she made was countered with facts, bylaws, and occasionally subtle glares from the neighbors. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, the president called the meeting to a close. "The board has reviewed all documentation. The homeowner in question is in full compliance. No fines, no eviction, no further action required." Karen's jaw dropped. She blinked. Then she huffed, shoved her papers into her bag, and stormed out like a tiny hurricane, leaving a trail of chaos. I could hear her muttering as she left, probably plotting the next drama, but for now, victory was mine. Neighbors slowly started clapping, some laughing quietly. A few shook their heads in disbelief, clearly amazed at the spectacle they had witnessed. I packed up my documents, keeping my cool while inwardly celebrating the fact that I had survived Karen's ultimate showdown. As I left the meeting, I glanced back. Karen was outside, phone in hand, probably recording her tragic defeat for posterity. I couldn't help but chuckle. 3 years of ownership, countless mornings of HOA headaches, and Karen's relentless antics, and yet fact and patience had won the day. But I knew this wouldn't be the last of Karen's theatrics. For now, though, I had survived the most dramatic confrontation of my suburban life. The war had been won, the suspense resolved, and the absurdity, well, it was still there, lingering like a stubborn cloud. After the HOA meeting, I felt like I had just survived a battle royale without any respawns. Karen, of course, was not gone. Oh no, she was still prowling the neighborhood, muttering about bylaws, fines, and imaginary violations. But at least now the board had officially ruled in my favor. I had survived the ultimate 4:50 a.m. showdown, the digital chaos, and the driveway theatrics. Victory was mine. I returned home, cautiously optimistic, and poured myself a cup of coffee that I swear tasted like triumph. Mr. Whiskers hopped onto the counter, tail flicking in approval. or maybe just curiosity about my caffeine intake. Either way, I felt vindicated. The neighbors' reactions over the next few days were hilarious. Some came over to congratulate me, whispering things like, "I can't believe Karen thought she could get away with that," while others gave me wary nods, still unsure whether I'd survive some kind of suburban apocalypse or just a particularly dramatic nightmare. I laughed, realizing my life had essentially turned into a soap opera with HOA regulations as the script. And Karen, well, karma has a funny way of working. A few days after the meeting, I noticed her meticulously manicured garden had been cited by the HOA for violating landscaping rules. Apparently, while she was focused on my illegal occupancy, she had ignored her own minor infractions. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could practically hear the universe laughing as she received her first official notice in front of the same neighbors who had witnessed her meltdown. I had to admit, there was a sweet satisfaction in knowing that her obsession with control had backfired spectacularly. Every dramatic social media post, every 4:50 a.m. visit, every emergency call to the board, all of it had crumbled under the weight of facts, patience, and admittedly a lot of humor on my part. Life slowly returned to normal. I could finally enjoy my mornings without bracing for another Karen storm. I watered my garden, sipped coffee in peace, and even started binge-watching shows I had been ignoring while surviving HOA chaos. Mr. Whiskers, now fully aware of his role as guardian of household sanity, resumed his throne by the window, occasionally hissing at the mailbox to keep up appearances. I reflected on the absurdity of it all. Owning a home should feel empowering, secure, and occasionally relaxing. Instead, I had been thrust into a dramatic saga that would rival daytime TV. And yet, I had learned a few things: document everything, stay calm under pressure, and never underestimate the power of public proof over petty theatrics. By the end of the week, Karen had quietly disappeared from social media for a while, presumably plotting her next move, though hopefully with a little humility this time. I, meanwhile, could finally savor the sweet satisfaction of having survived her reign of early morning terror without losing my mind or my home. One morning, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I saw her glance at my house from across the street. Her eyes narrowed, her phone raised, but this time she paused. Maybe she finally realized that some battles are won not with shouting, posts, or theatrics, but with facts, patience, and a little bit of humor. And as I watched her storm off muttering something under her breath, I couldn't help but grin. 3 years of ownership, countless confrontations, and a fully intact home later, I had emerged victorious. Life in the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, well, as normal as it could be with Karen still lurking somewhere. The HOA board meetings became just another part of suburban life, not the stages for drama and chaos that Karen had hoped for. I finally felt free, empowered, and most importantly, untouchable by anyone who confused personal authority with community delusions. As the sun set behind my house, casting warm light across the lawn, I took a deep breath. My home, my rules, my sanity intact. And somewhere in the universe, Karen was probably retyping bylaws, planning her next 4:50 a.m. dramatic awakening. I laughed softly, sipping my coffee one last time. Some battles are epic, some are ridiculous, but the ones you win with patience, facts, and a little humor, those are the ones that feel the sweetest. And with that, the 4:50 a.m. horror story finally had a happy ending. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.